Have you ever reached your limit? That moment when you sit in a dark room, staring into emptiness and asking yourself, how much longer do I have to keep trying? No more tears, no more motivation, only a heavy silence where everything inside you wants to stop. But perhaps in that very moment you are standing at the threshold of a rebirth your soul has been preparing for a long time. Carl Jung believed that the stages we call hitting a dead end are actually signals that the soul is being restructured, breaking down the old to make way for the true self to appear. But to get there, you must walk through a territory no one else can walk for you. The land of exhaustion, doubt, fear, and those moments when you feel like collapsing. Force yourself to keep going is not a harsh call of just push through, but a ritual of the soul, forcing the fragile part of you to face your real strength, forcing the ego to learn to trust something greater than itself. This is not a journey of muscle, but of faith, of perseverance in the dark. In today's video, we will walk through 7 layers of that journey, where Jung shows that sometimes forcing yourself to keep going is not to become stronger, but to become more real. Are you ready to step beyond your old limits? 1. When you think you're exhausted, that is when the soul begins forging steel. There is a moment in every person's journey when the body trembles, the mind is tired, and you just want to give up. You say to yourself, I can't anymore. But Carl Jung once said, man cannot stand a meaningless life. 2. Exhaustion is not a sign that you are weakening. It is a signal that an old layer within you is preparing to collapse so that a stronger version can be born. Have you ever noticed the miracle of the human body? When you exercise, the moment your muscles burn the most is when they begin to grow. The soul is the same. Every time you think you are exhausted, it doesn't mean you are collapsing. You are forging steel within your spirit. Exhaustion is only the ash covering the fire being tempered beneath. I once heard the story of a painter named Clara. After years of effort, none of her paintings received any recognition. One day she said, I have painted everything inside me. I am empty. But before giving up, she created one last painting, not out of hope, but to end things. When she put down the brush, the painting was nothing like her past work, raw, chaotic, but painfully honest. Later, it was exhibited in Europe and praised as the primordial voice of the modern soul. Clara said, when I was exhausted, I stopped trying to be an artist. I just lived honestly. And from that, I found myself again. That is what Jung meant when he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. There is an illusion that only people who are always positive, always strong, go far. But in reality, perseverance does not come from motivation. It comes from meaning. Motivation is an external flame, while meaning is an inner flame, quiet but lasting. Jung believed that people collapse, not because they lack energy, but because they no longer see why they must continue. When you are exhausted, pause and ask yourself, what part of me is truly tired? The body or the soul that is asking to be heard? Perhaps you are in that phase where everything seems meaningless. Work becomes a burden. Goals that once excited you now feel like a checklist. But this is not the end. This is the transition between the old self, the one who chased approval, and the true self, the one who only needs to live in alignment with deeper meaning. When the ego realizes it is losing control, it resists, making you want to give up. But in truth, your soul is simply saying, enough. Stop chasing, start living truthfully. Remember, exhaustion is not a sign of failure, it is an invitation. Every time you want to stop, look deeper and ask, am I tired because I am living truthfully? or because I have been living the way others wanted? The answer will show you that what you need is not to rest, but to change the way you walk. There is a story about Jung during the years of inner crisis after separating from Freud. For nearly a decade, he drowned in strange dreams, uncertainty, and overwhelming visions. But instead of running away, Jung wrote, drew, and spoke with the images in his mind. From this came the Red Book, the soul map of analytical psychology. If Jung had given up when he felt exhausted, the world would not have that legacy. Force yourself to keep going does not mean tormenting yourself, but forcing the old self, the weak, frightened part, to die so that the part of you that truly wants to live can be born. Just as a snake must shed its skin to grow, you must allow part of yourself to crack for the soul to breathe. You continue not to prove anything, but because something inside you has not finished living. If today you feel tired, know that nothing is wrong. You are in the forging steel phase. Allow yourself to rest, but do not quit. Slow down, but do not turn back. For as long as you keep walking, even slowly, the fire remains alive. And one day you will realize that what made you strong was not that you never fell, but that you always stood up after falling. That is the moment your soul has become steel. When you walk beyond exhaustion, you enter a different realm where the world's noise fades and only the quiet voice of the soul remains. If you are in that stage, do not run. Stop, breathe, and write this down. I am not finished. I am being reforged. Let this sentence be your soul's whisper every time you think you cannot continue anymore. When fear screams, the shadow is asking to be seen. After you have walked past the boundary of exhaustion and realized that the soul is being forged into steel, a deeper challenge begins to appear. Fear. It does not come loudly, but like a sudden cold wind sweeping through the journey, making you doubt everything, yourself, the path, and the meaning of continuing at all. But Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Every time you want to stop, it is not because the world is against you, but because the forgotten part of your unconscious is asking to be seen. Fear is a sign that the shadow is knocking. The part you once tried to hide, weakness, shame, failure, doubt, now rises, not to destroy you, but to be acknowledged. You cannot stay strong forever by rejecting the weak part of yourself. Just like pushing a ball under water, the harder you push, the stronger it rebounds. Fear works the same way. The more you avoid it, the more it chases you. But when you stop, turn around, and look at it directly, you will see that it is not as large as you imagined, only a part of you that has not been loved long enough. In a Jungian therapy session, I heard the story of a woman named Eleanor, a seasoned mountain climber. During an expedition to conquer the Alps, she encountered a snowstorm. Plans fell apart, teammates withdrew, and only she remained between the mountain, exhausted, trembling, and afraid. Later she said, "At that moment I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of facing myself, when there was no one left to witness me." But in that moment, when she could neither climb upward nor descend, Eleanor had only one choice, to sit still and breathe. She stopped fighting the fear, stopped resisting the cold, and remained with each breath. When the storm finally passed, she no longer felt she had to conquer the mountain, but instead felt she had become part of it. Jung called this moment the meeting with the shadow, where we stop running from our instincts and emotions. Fear is not the enemy. It is the mirror that reflects what you have not yet dared to acknowledge. When you dare to look at it, it becomes light. When you avoid it, it becomes a chain. Modern society teaches us that courage is the absence of fear, But the truth is, courage is walking through fear without letting it define you. When you fear failure, fear abandonment, fear not being good enough, that is the unconscious sending a message: there is something within me that needs to be healed. If you listen, fear becomes a guide. If you ignore it, it becomes the driver. Think back to the last time you were truly afraid. Maybe when you lost your job, or when someone you trusted hurt you, or when everything you planned collapsed. You thought you would not survive it, yet you did. Not because the fear disappeared, but because you learned how to keep walking while it remained. That is the moment of transformation, when fear stops being the barrier and becomes the fuel that carries you further. Jung believed fear is the threshold of spiritual maturity. Every time the shadow appears, it does not break you, it expands you. The more you acknowledge your darkness, the more whole you become. And that is the true meaning of force yourself to keep going. Not to force yourself to overpower fear, but to allow yourself to walk through it without pretending to be fearless. Fear is not a darkness to be destroyed, but a child left behind, waiting to be seen. Look at it with gentleness. When you are able to remain with your fear without running away, you have already won, not against the world, but against yourself. And each time you do that, the energy once trapped in fear is released, becoming strength, clarity, and deeper trust in yourself. If today you are afraid, do not cover your ears or pretend to be calm. Sit down, breathe, and say softly, "I see you. I am not running anymore." Let fear be present. Trembling is fine, but do not walk away, because as Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Only by walking through fear can you reach the higher state of awareness, waiting on the other side. And one day, you will realize that what once made you tremble is exactly what made you strong. No light is born from comfort, only from darkness that has been understood. If this touches you, share your story in the comments. Tell about a time you were afraid, but walked anyway, even just one small step. That simple story may become a gentle light for someone lost in the dark, reminding them that no one has to face fear alone. When you lose direction, that is when the persona begins to crack. When you have been brave enough to look into your fear and walk through it, something else begins to happen, quieter, subtler, but far more profound. You begin to feel directionless. You no longer know why you are doing what you are doing, and you are not sure whether you still believe in what once ignited you. And this, Jung says, is the moment when the persona, the mask we wear to survive, begins to crack. There is a strange feeling that arises when you no longer know who you are. Not because you are truly lost, but because for the first time you are no longer clinging to the roles you used to perform. Jung defined the persona as the mask through which we present ourselves to the world, a necessary part of social existence. But when the mask becomes the entire self, we lose the one who lives behind it. And when the soul wants to return, it does not tear the mask away all at once. It makes you feel lost, forcing you to stop and look at yourself. A viewer of the channel once shared her journey. As a creative director in a major advertising agency, she was once the image of a successful woman, confident, talented, always full of energy. But after years of chasing recognition, she began waking up every morning with a sense of emptiness. She said, "I no longer knew who I was living for. I had built a perfect identity, and I no longer recognized myself inside it." She quit her job, left the city, and spent months living in a small coastal village. In the silence, she realized she had never truly known herself. She only knew how to perform herself. And something miraculous happened. When the mask fell, she did not lose energy. She found real energy. She began painting again, not to sell, but to live. Her first painting after 10 years she titled, "The Day I Got Lost." This is what Jung meant when he wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Losing direction is not a failure. It is a privilege, because only when the old path disappears can the real path begin. Modern psychology calls this phenomenon ego dissolution, the dissolving of the constructed identity. Research by Dr. Robin Carhart Harris, Imperial College London, shows that when the brain's self-identity network temporarily quiets, a person can experience a loss of the sense of self. It sounds frightening, but it is deeply natural, like during deep meditation or being absorbed in music to the point of forgetting yourself. It is not a loss, it is expansion, when the ego steps aside so the true self can speak. Jung called this the early stage of individuation, the return of the soul to its own center. This phase always comes with ambiguity. You will feel empty, unmotivated, and detached from what once pleased you, but do not rush to return to your old identity simply because it feels safe. If you do, you will fall back into the cycle of meaninglessness. The mask of being successful, strong, impressive, although once useful, cannot accompany you to the end of your journey. It allows you to survive, but it does not allow you to live when it begins to crack. Let it crack. Every crack in the persona is a beam of light through which the soul can look out and through which the world can finally see you. Losing direction is not a void to fear, but a space in which rebirth can happen. You cannot force yourself to move forward with the old will, because that will was constructed from the persona, from wants that were programmed into you by others. Instead, you must sit and listen. Listen to what is rising. Listen to what must be released. In that silence, meaning begins to form. And one day you'll see, you no longer need to be strong. You only need to be true. When you stop trying to be a good person, a successful person, a likable person, you finally become a free person. If today you are at that crossroads where everything once certain dissolves, do not be afraid. Do not look for a new map yet. The old map has expired, and the new one only appears when you dare to be with yourself. Write this down as a vow of the soul. I do not need to know where I am going. I only need to know I am done pretending. From that moment, you are no longer walking with the ego's will, but with the breath of your true being. And that is the first step toward freedom. Number 4. When motivation disappears, find meaning, not goals. If you have ever lost yourself so deeply that you no longer recognize who you are, then the next question arises. What happens when you no longer have motivation to continue? Have you ever awakened in the morning, looked around and saw everything was the same, your job, your habits, your once exciting goals, but inside you felt empty? Not because you are lazy, but because the flame that once guided you has gone out. You are doing everything right, but you do not feel alive. And at that moment, Jung said, you do not need to restore motivation. You need to restore meaning. Goals make you run quickly, but meaning makes you go far. When the mind says enough, meaning whispers, go a little further. A person who lives by goals may reach the destination, but a person who lives by meaning reaches themselves. When external motivation fades, only meaning can keep you going, quietly but steadily, like groundwater beneath the desert. I once heard the story of Ava, a surgeon in New York. She had everything one could admire: prestige, status, high income. But one day, after a 12-hour surgery, she looked at herself in the mirror and cried, everything was fine, but fine had become hollow. She said, I realized I was no longer healing anyone. I was functioning like a machine. Ava took a leave and joined a community healthcare program in Kenya. There she worked in a small clinic, with no modern equipment, only real humans, sweat, tears, gratitude. One night, sitting with a sick child, she cried again. But this time, not out of emptiness, but because she felt alive. Later she said, "I thought I had lost motivation, but I had merely lost meaning." Jung once wrote, "The least of things with meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Life is not made meaningful by achievements, but by the meaning woven through the way we live each day. Society teaches us to build goals, career, finances, accomplishments. But Jung believed that when life is driven entirely by goals, we lose our connection to the soul. Goals come from the ego, the part that wants to control, conquer, and measure. Meaning comes from the self, the part that only wants to live truthfully. Motivation depends on circumstances. Meaning comes from the connection between conscious and unconscious. The moments when you are not just working, but your soul is working too. In the Bible, Jonah's story illustrates this. Jonah was given a calling to speak to the people of Nineveh, but he feared and fled. A storm rose and he was swallowed by a whale for 3 days and nights. Only in darkness did he listen to his true calling. When he accepted the meaning of his journey, the whale released him and he continued on his destined path. Motivation made Jonah run. Meaning made him return. Sometimes the moment you lose motivation is the soul saying, "Stop running, listen." Maybe you have been living by expectation, to be better, to be successful, to prove something. But when those no longer ignite you, it is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of reorientation. Force yourself to keep going does not mean forcing yourself to do more, but forcing yourself to look deeper. Not how do I get motivated again, but why am I doing this at all? When the answer returns, the energy returns, not as excitement, but as clarity. If you feel empty, pause and write 3 things. What makes you forget time while doing it? What makes you feel alive, not just functioning? What would you still do, even if no one ever recognized it? That is the direction of meaning. When motivation is gone, do not assume you've lost passion. See it as an invitation. Go deeper. Motivation comes and goes. Meaning is what holds you when everything else breaks. One day you will understand. The empty moments are not failure, but the space where meaning wants to rise. And when meaning returns, you no longer need anyone to push you, because your soul becomes your source. If this resonates, leave 1 word in the comments. Meaning, no explanation, just a declaration to yourself. When everything changes, become fluid like water. And when you have found meaning, the quiet flame that lets you stand up after every fall, life will test you with something else. Change. If you once believed that staying strong meant holding firmly to your plans, then this stage will feel confusing, because there are times when, even with the perfect plan, everything changes suddenly. The person you trusted leaves. Your job no longer fits. The world shifts faster than you can adapt. And you ask yourself, what do I do now? Carl Jung once said, what you resist persists. The more you fight what is happening, the more it consumes you. But when you loosen your grip, accept, and flow like water, you begin to find strength within softness. I know the story of Isabel. After 12 years of marriage, she discovered her husband had been unfaithful. The shock was like a wave swallowing everything she had ever believed in. For months, Isabel tried to hold on, counseling, trying to fix things, but deep down, she knew something had died. One morning, Looking at her wedding ring, she whispered, "I don't know who I am if I am not his wife anymore." She left the shared home with only a few belongings and moved to a town near the sea. At first, everything was chaos. She was scared, angry, empty. But every morning, watching the ocean change colors under the sunrise, Isabel realized water does not argue with the rocks. It flows around them. Water does not try to hold a shape. It adapts. And by doing so, it travels farther than anything that resists. She began writing, painting, cooking, things she once loved before marriage swallowed her joy. She stopped trying to move on. She let pain move through her, like water through stone. 1 year later, when she saw her ex-husband again, she simply said, "Thank you. The crashing wave taught me how to float." Isabel's story reflects Jung's teaching. The self does not control, it adapts. When you align with the flow instead of fighting it, you do not become weaker, you evolve. A river does not stop to complain when it meets a rock. It changes direction, slips around, or slowly reshapes the rock over time. And beautifully, it is the bends and collisions that make the river beautiful. Just like your life, the changes, losses, and disruptions do not destroy you. They shape you. Psychology calls this resilience, psychological elasticity. People who adapt are not less hurt. They are simply not confined to one identity. When life changes, they do not ask, "Why is this happening to me?" but, "What is this teaching me?" That shift is what keeps them standing. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And sometimes, force yourself to keep going does not mean continuing in the same direction, but allowing the old map to dissolve and trusting a new compass. I once heard a beautiful metaphor from Japanese tradition. When pottery breaks, instead of being thrown away, it is repaired with gold, kintsugi. The cracks are not hidden, they become the most valuable part. Humans are the same. When you allow yourself to change, when you do not force yourself to be as you once were, your cracks become your beauty. The strongest people are not those who never change, but those who change while staying true to their core. You may change jobs, environments, relationships, even dreams, as long as you remain connected to what makes you feel real. Like water, whether it evaporates or freezes, it is still water. If you are in a period of upheaval, remember, you do not need to know where you are going, you only need to keep flowing. Because every river, no matter how winding, eventually reaches the sea. One day you will look back and realize that the moments that terrified you were the moments you grew the most. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "If I were water, how would I move through this?" And you will see, life never asked you to control, only to trust your own living current. Sometimes the strongest person is not the one who stands firm, but the one who flows through every storm with an open heart. Number 6. When the world does not believe in you, let your inner authority lead. There comes a point in personal evolution when you realize no one understands you anymore. People who once supported you begin to doubt you. Those who once praised you now fall silent. Every piece of advice, every opinion, seems to push against the direction you feel compelled to take. And you begin to wonder, am I wrong? Carl Jung called this stage the awakening of inner authority, the inner sovereignty, where you no longer live by the noise of the world, but by the quiet voice of the soul. When a person steps out of the collective consciousness, they are seen as strange, deviant, even mistaken. But that is the sign you are leaving the map of the crowd, to walk the path of individuation, the most important journey of the soul. I once heard the story of a young novelist named Leona. After publishing her first novel, she received a flood of criticism. Too abstract, doesn't fit the market, no one will read this. In despair, she considered quitting writing. But one evening, she reread Jung's journals and came across the sentence, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." She realized that what hurt was not the criticism, but the fear of being truthful to herself. All this time she had been writing to be accepted, not to speak the truth of her soul. She returned to her desk, but this time she did not write to succeed, she wrote to be honest. Her second book, The River Beneath the River, was not written for others, but as a mirror for herself. It did not sell immediately, but 3 years later, when readers began longing for deeper writing, the book became recognized as one of the most nuanced feminist voices of her generation. Leona said, "The world didn't need to believe in me. I needed to believe in the voice living inside me." That is inner authority, which Jung believed only appears when the ego has matured enough to not need applause. The inner voice is not loud, not persuasive, but carries a strange certainty. When you turn inward and listen to it, you step into a realm where intuition replaces logic, where the soul knows the way long before the mind understands. A metaphor for this is a sailor in the fog. He cannot see the shore, he has no map, but he feels the wind and rhythm of the waves. Trusting that there is land ahead, the world calls him reckless. But only he can feel the direction. Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. When you look inward instead of outward, the path illuminates beneath your feet. No one else needs to understand, because they cannot hear the voice meant only for you." History shows that the world always doubts those ahead of their time. Galileo was imprisoned for saying, "The earth revolves around the sun." Van Gogh died poor, unable to sell a single painting. Yet they are proof that the deepest truths are rejected before they are revered. So when the world does not believe you, do not try to convince it. Your silence is stronger than argument. Let time and consistency speak. Jung did not defend himself when rejected after parting from Freud. He simply continued walking. A decade later, his work became foundational to modern psychology. There are moments when you must be willing to be misunderstood in order to be free. If everyone understands you, you are still speaking their language, not your own. Inner authority does not need a crowd. It only needs you, steady enough to listen, brave enough to step forward, consistent enough to not compromise. If you are being doubted now, see it as confirmation. When the crowd turns away, do not panic. Bow your head in gratitude. That silence is clearing space for you to hear your soul. One day, those who doubted you will ask, "How did you know?" You will simply smile because you knew all along. Force yourself to keep going is not about running faster. It is about keeping the rhythm of your faith steady when no one is walking beside you. And perhaps now, at this point in the journey, pause for a moment and press like, not to support the channel, but as a quiet ritual for yourself. Because when you press like, you are whispering to the universe, "I still trust the voice inside me, even if no one else hears it." Number 7. When you no longer try to keep going, and yet you are still moving, that is when the self is leading. And when you have become still enough to hear the inner voice, after the world has gone quiet, something strange begins to happen. You no longer have to force yourself to keep going. The path is still the same, the steps are still the same. But instead of struggling to push yourself, you feel another energy moving through you, as if an invisible hand is gently guiding, not pushing, not ordering, simply accompanying. This is when the self, the sacred center Jung described, begins to lead. Throughout the journey, you forced yourself to overcome exhaustion, face fear, shed the mask, rediscover meaning, adapt to change, and trust your inner voice. But in the deepest layer, keep going is no longer effort. It is the alignment between the one who walks and the path that unfolds. Jung believed the self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. When the ego stops controlling, life begins to operate through you. A friend of mine, a successful businesswoman in London, reached everything others admire: status, property, reputation. But when her father passed away, everything collapsed. She left her job, sold her apartment, and moved to a small wooden house in the countryside. The first months were emptiness. She tried meditating, reading, finding herself, but the harder she tried, the further she felt. One morning, while making tea, a drop of boiling water touched her hand. She was startled, but instead of pulling away, she simply paused. And suddenly, she felt something: life. Not as a concept or purpose, but simply as presence. That day, she did not meditate. She did not write. She just walked through the fields, and she realized she was walking without needing to force herself anymore. Not to heal, not to achieve, but because life was happening through her. That is what Jung meant by the self, when you no longer try to live correctly, but allow life to live through you. You do not abandon the journey. You abandon your attempts to control it. You are not giving up. You are releasing the ego's demand to arrive faster. Many people think force yourself to keep going means clenching your fists and pushing through. But at a deeper level, it means forcing yourself to learn to trust. Trust that the river moves even when you stop swimming. Trust that life continues even when you stop gripping it. The force here is not forcefulness. It is the courage to release fear so trust can speak. The metaphor I love is a swimmer in the ocean at night. When the waves are strong, he struggles to stay afloat. But the struggle exhausts him. Only when he relaxes, allowing the water to carry him, does he discover he was never sinking at all. The water had always been holding him. Life works the same way. There is a time to swim and a time to float. When you have walked far enough, you realize you are not holding the journey. The journey is holding you. The separation between the walker and the path dissolves. There is only movement of life through you, breath by breath. This is not an ending. It is transformation, from someone fighting life to someone living in rhythm with life. Neuroscience calls this flow state, when the ego disappears and action flows effortlessly. But Jung would say, this is when the self is living through you. You are no longer doing, meditating, healing. You are simply being. And being is the highest act of the soul. One day you will feel it. On days when you thought you had no strength, you still rise, still walk, still breathe, gentle, deep, real. You are no longer trying to overcome. You are simply present, and in that presence life opens on its own. You stop trying to become someone else and return to the one you have always been. Force yourself to keep going, not to move harder, but to trust more deeply. Not to push forward, but to remember. The path is inside you, not in front of you. When you reach this point, you see, life was never asking you to prove yourself strong, only to allow yourself to grow. If you have traveled to this point with me, perhaps you now see that force yourself to keep going was never about pushing past pain through willpower, but about learning to trust the deeper life force already inside you. Every time you stood up after falling, faced fear, released the mask, rediscovered meaning, adapted to change and listened to your soul, you were not merely surviving, you were learning how to live. You do not need to conquer life. You only need to grow beyond the pain that once caged you. In the end, there is no success more sacred than becoming yourself, grounded, quiet, and real. When you stop resisting, life aligns itself. When you stop forcing, the natural current returns. Energy flows again, gently, steadily, wisely. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who may be standing at the edge of giving up. One reminder can be enough to relight a fading flame. And do not forget to subscribe. Our journey with Jung is not over. There are still deeper layers of the soul waiting for us, where each step is no longer effort, but a return.